So to our guests, welcome. We are glad to have you. This is our very first panel for back to school parenting, and I'm very excited to have three great guests with me. And so I just want to get started first by introducing who I am. I'm Quentin Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Hybrid Focus Consulting. And my purpose is to educate the youth and families in our community through life lessons, through sport, and through music. And so I founded HFC, Hybrid Focus Consulting, for that reason. And our vision is to help at potential youth achieve a positive affirmation of self through spirituality, academics, social emotional learning, which we'll be talking about today, and health. So with that being said, I'm very excited to introduce our panel to you. Some great folks here. I have Ashley with me, I have Dwayne with me, and I have very good friends, Shannon and colleagues. So we're gonna start with Ashley. They're gonna just give us a little rundown of what it is that they do, as well as why they, even got into this work in the first place. And so I'm really curious to hear from you guys and let our audience know. So we're gonna start with you, Ashley. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. And first off, thank you, Q, for inviting me to be a part of this panel tonight. I think that everything that you're doing with Hybrid Focus Consulting is very important and is very necessary for our families and our children. But moving right along, my name is Ashley McGoy. I am the founder of Play for Purpose Pediatrics, and I am a pediatric OT. And if you've never heard of OT before, it stands for occupational therapy. And so my main goal is to work with children in multiple settings. I work with children in their home, school, and out in the community. And I focus on a variety of things, but four of the main things that I focus on with children are their motor skills. I focus on self-care, self-regulation, and sensory processing. And so the reason why I got into this line of work is because I do have a passion for children. And I just love the flexibility of being able to follow these kids in multiple settings and teaching them necessary life skills to help them just be as independent and as successful as possible.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Ashley. And I've been impressed with some of the things that I've seen Ashley do. And so we will be dropping some handles for you to follow these great panelists later on in the show. So we're going to move right along. Miss Keys, Shannon, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Shannon Keys. And like Q said, we're colleagues. And I work at the Academy Group, and I'm the lead advisor. So what I do is I help students in middle school. I help them with creating goals, helping them to measure their goals, and just help them with just executive functioning skills. And then I also do a lot of my work with the high school students, very similar, but definitely a bump up with that process. With the juniors, I'm helping them prepare for college. So we do a whole series on just preparation, how to choose a college, making sure it's a good fit financially, socially, all of those above. And the reason why I got into this work previous to me coming to the Academy Group is I was a teacher. And so one of the things that I enjoy most was just building relationships with students and families and helping them to be able to achieve whatever goal they want, as long as they have a clear plan in place to measure it. And so I just have a huge passion for that. And I just love the work that I do. And I'm just happy to be able to collaborate with Hybrid Focus, and just everything that Q is doing, I absolutely am in favor of. So I'm really proud of this, that he's, this thing that he is doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you. DB, go ahead, brother. Mr. Bryant.
Hey, like everyone else said, I'm absolutely happy to be here. Dwayne Bryant, president and founder of InterVision International. We've been around since 1997. We've directly mentored over 50,000 students in the Chicagoland area, probably another 3,000, 4,000 in Florida. We provide evidence-based curriculum. We've helped schools and school districts increase test scores over 35%, reduce suspensions over 70%, quadruple parental involvement, eliminated expulsions in some of our partnering districts. You asked, why did I get into this? I was that student that I'm helping. So every student that I'm helping is like I'm helping myself all over again. When I was young, I used to wonder, man, what would I be like if I had a man, or if I had someone who could speak life into me to help me navigate this terrain, whereas I didn't have that kind of structure growing up. And so incorporated in Chicago, now we have offices in Chicago and in Florida. Loving the work that we're doing, social emotional learning, character ed, life management skills that went through a series of different names. So we do curriculum based mentoring. Many of the people who work with me have now gone on to start their own companies. Some are multimillionaires doing wonderful things. So my thing is we have to be able to impact this world in a positive way and leave it better. As you can see the Black man back here giving this young boy the world, or young child the world. But if you look at the world, it's kind of tattered and it's kind of torn. So we got to put it back together and give them something better than what we got. So that's what I'm put on this planet to do.
Man, that's wonderful, brother. I appreciate that. And this has been wonderful. Appreciate those introductions. Before we move forward, I got to give a shout out to my sponsors. They've made a lot of this work possible. So first, I got to give a shout out to All That She Needs. It's an online women's boutique serving all of your fashion needs, from just lounging to when you're ready to step out for date night. Shannon, I know, man, you be taking Mr. Keys, y'all going to some nice restaurants, so you got to check out All That She Needs. They got something for you. And then Miss Peewee's Cookies, best butter cookies you're going to get in Chicago. So definitely look them up. I'm going to drop that link in there for you as well. And then lastly, Jerk and Go out in Olympia Fields, 3940 Vollmer Road. Definitely check them out. Oxtails, goat, whatever you want, all your jerk needs. So definitely check out our sponsors. They made a lot of this possible. So appreciate you guys. So now we're going to go ahead and dive in. Social emotional learning during the pandemic, right? So first, we're just going to identify exactly what social emotional learning is. And so I'm going to give you the verbatim definition as it comes from Castle. And I'll explain who Castle is in one moment. Social and emotional learning, also referred to as SEL, is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions. Notice it says understand and manage. That's a two-part, right? Self and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So this definition, again, is taken from Castle. Castle is the collaborative for academic and social emotional learning. And so this organization was started in 1994, and their whole mission was to help make evidence-based social and emotional learning an integral part of education. And a fun fact, Illinois was the very first state to adopt Castle's work. And so now we have about 20 districts nationwide that are now serving 1.7 million students over 20 different districts. And they started that back in 2011. So SEL is fairly new in our schools. And so this is a reason why this conversation is very important. And so one of our outcomes for today is to identify what those 5 components are. And so that's, again, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so to our folks who are watching, I'm actually going to drop you guys a link in here that will take you directly to the Castle framework. So this is one of the resources that you can kind of refer to as we go along. A lot of good stuff in here. And so this is something that after we get done, you can refer back to and be able to pull away things. So we have one of our outcomes also as well is really to understand why SEL is important to both the parent and the child. So as we dive into these 4 outcomes, we really want to just kind of key in on each of those different things. A lot of parents have actually asked, why is there a connection, right? And so that's one of the first things that we want to dive into. And so for parents, statistics suggest significant associations between SEL skills in kindergarten and key outcomes as you become an adult. So they're tying these from the time that you even start, and this can even go back to preschool. And I'm sure Ashley will probably speak to some of these things later. But SEL has decreased the likelihood of living or being on a wait list for public housing, receiving public assistance, having an involvement with the police before adulthood, and actually spending time in a detention facility, which is why we have Mr. Brian here, because he's done a lot of work with kids who have faced those suspensions and have faced that. So he'll be able to give us a lot of that insight. So with that, we're going to start with you, Ashley, and we're going to go around. And to our attendees, the format is I'm going to ask a question, and we're going to have the panelists and myself, we're going to respond to these with insight from our expertise and how we would handle this. So our first question is, how has social emotional learning impacted your work and the kiddos or families you have supported? And this can be for the positive or for the negative, right? But just really understanding in your career, how has social emotional learning really impacted your work?
So for me, it's honestly been a positive experience because I do start off working with a lot of the younger population. So I get in right at the door, right when they're early. And so I can start implementing these things and teaching these families right away, like certain skills. And so self-regulation is one of the main things that I teach or I work on with children. And it's kind of along those same lines as the social emotional learning, just a different term for it. But I'm early when it comes to teaching children and families like what are emotions, how to identify emotions, how do I respond to these emotions when I have them in an appropriate way. And so another unique part of my experience is that sometimes I work with these kids from anywhere between 1 and 3 years. And so I'm seeing these kids over the course of a few years, and I'm working with these kids in a variety of settings. Sometimes I'm in this kid's house with them. Sometimes I go to their daycare. Sometimes I meet with the families like at the park or at the library. So I get to see how this affects these kids learning as early as possible. And I've worked with some older kids too, and I could see the major difference between starting a kid learning these skills at the age as young as 2, and then a child coming to me when they're 12 and 13 and trying to teach them these same skills. So I've definitely seen it paid off as far as starting very young with teaching SEL.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, and that's a very good point as far as, and that's almost with anything, right? I mean, we've seen kids who have not had the proper foundation coming to kindergarten just knowing simple things like sight words and sounds, right? And so now you're playing the catch-up game, and so it's no different when you're dealing with SEL. But the issue is that SEL has showed that it will, with proper implementation, will actually boost performance. And so it's almost kind of like you have to have that foundation before you even get into this other stuff. So that very important point. Thank you for that, Ashley. Shannon, what about you?
So for me, I think it's been a positive and a negative. I will say that, our students come from various schools, charter and public schools. And so we were able to identify the gaps. And so one thing with this pandemic is that it has done for our kids is we are expecting them to do a very college level style learning. We're expecting them to log on. We're expecting them to know how to maneuver through a virtual space. We're expecting them to type an email to their teacher, communicate virtual. Those are skills that weren't necessarily taught in the classroom. However, I do think that there were some social SEL skills that was taught in school, but it's different because we're expecting them to do different tasks. So one of the things that we focus on with our students is just executive functioning skills. And we take it very slow. So how do you learn how to, communicate to your teacher? How can you show agency if you don't understand a topic? How can you become more organized so you can know when to complete an assignment or how to turn it in? And, we do that honestly from middle school all the way up to high school. And we've seen some great successes. In fact, one of Q's students just showed a great example of how she wanted more help. And so she sent an email to Q, which was an exact what Q taught in that lesson. And so those are the skills we want our students to be able to do during this pandemic. And also just go through the process. So once you teach an SEL skill, the kid, they have to go through the process. They have to go through doing well with it and maybe not doing so well with it, but learning through the process. So that's one of the things that I really focus on is the process that your child has to go through with SEL. And another thing I always say, SEL is not necessarily in isolation. It should be embedded within the curriculum that you are teaching. So back in my classroom days, me and my co-teacher, we knocked it out the park when it came to centers. That was literally SEL, how to be independent, how to make sure you're keeping track of all of your materials, how to make sure you're turning in assignments. It's just different in a virtual space. And so we're helping our students to be able to maneuver in that. And quite frankly, I think they're going to be very successful by the time they get to high school because they'll know how to communicate and show agency for themselves in virtual world and in person.
Yep, absolutely. No, those are very, very good points. And it just really made me think about some research that actually Castle did alongside, I believe the company is Civic Energy, if I'm not mistaken. but they showed that SEL, the impact of it, students who went through SEL programs in school, they showed improvement in multiple academic and social areas compared to students who solely just received those school services. And so embedding it is absolutely necessary, because we all know, and we'll get into this, but all school resources are not built the same, right? And so there's a average amount of time that is suggested that schools actually spend each week in SEL. And to be quite frank, every school does not necessarily meet that requirement. And so having a teacher like yourself, where there may not necessarily be all the resources there, embedding it into your curriculum, embedding it into your teaching practice is absolutely necessary. So great feedback. Dwayne, what about you, brother? How has this impacted you?
Sure. So I want to give some deep historical context. And Dr. Randolph is a friend of mine who actually initiated SEL with Castle into the city of Chicago back in the day. From 2000 to 2010, the city of Chicago lost 200,000 residents. 92% of them were African-American, meaning 182,000 people, Black people, left the city of Chicago in that 10-year period of time. The majority of them went either to the south suburb or the west suburb. The ones who went to the south suburb were in like Matson, Country Club Hills, not so much Olympia Fields, but in Richmond Park and things of that nature. Dr. Blundeen Davis, who used to be the chief education officer for Chicago Public Schools, became the CEO of Matson in 2003. In 2005, she brought my company out to do all of the SEL for all of the students, because the reality is Matson was about a 67% white neighborhood before this happened. When the Black folk came in, today it's over 85% Black. So the white teachers were like, what in the fried chicken is going, test scores are going to go down, they're going to drive us crazy, crime is going to go up, et cetera. But Dr. Davis had already seen the work that we did in Chicago at Corliss High School on 103rd, Proctor, and all the APCs. So what we did is when we got there, she said, we looked at the data, the suspension data. 80% of all suspensions were, guess what? Black boys. So she said, what we want you guys to do is to work with the Black boys. We did not work on academics. We did not work on test scores. It was strictly SEL, goal setting, conflict resolution, bullying, time management, the power of words, first impression, hope, etc. And literally that first year, we saw suspensions drop. In that year, they had over 2,000 suspensions with over 700 students. So imagine the amount of money that school was losing at $100 a day per student out. That's over $200,000. So now we're talking about the business of all of this stuff. And so when we went in, suspensions dropped in year one from 2,000 to 1,200. Well, that's 800 drop, which is good, but it wasn't that good enough. The second year, suspensions dropped to about 946. And over a 5-year period of time, suspensions were like down to 30 some odd suspensions. Well, we didn't realize we were not there for test scores, but test scores shot up 35% at the same time that suspensions were going down 70%. So we began to realize, not from other people's studies, but from direct studies right there at Hooth Middle School and Madison School District 162, that if you focus on the SEL, you stabilize school climate. Then we began to get parents involved, because one day a parent came to our time management workshop to pick up her child, and she said, yo, why aren't y'all teaching this to us? We're like, well, we only contract to work with the students. And the parents said, hey, if you were teaching this to us, we can back this information up at home. So then we began to do parent workshops, student workshops, et cetera. And literally Matson, by the time 2010, Matson was the top minority performing school district in the entire state of Illinois. Then they opened up Southland College Prep, which is the only charter school in the state of Illinois, in the south side of South suburban area, Southland. We provided 100% of all of the mentoring from 2010 to 2014. 100% of the students graduate with full merit-based scholarships. So SEL, it absolutely works. We have evidence-based demonstrated practices, demonstrated results, and we weren't focusing on academics, but academics directly related, improved based on what we were doing in the SEL space.
No, and you hit on a key point with those parents reaching out and wanting the support to be able to implement it at home.
Has to be.
biggest things, and this is just speaking from my experience. I was talking to a school counselor, and she was like, a lot of times what parents don't realize is that their student is sitting in front of a teacher for 1,000 hours a school year. Think about that, 1,000 hours. A lot of us wouldn't let our kids spend 1,000 hours with nobody, you know what I'm saying? But we send them to school, and a lot of these parents don't even have a relationship with the teachers. Yep. It's almost like you're gonna build a relationship with your boss and different people at work who hold influence, right? And so why wouldn't you have a relationship with the person who really has a lot of your child's future in their hands? And so that SEL definitely comes at home because we don't have sight into what is going on with our kids at school. That's 40 hours a week that you don't really have eyes on who your child is, what type of facade they might be putting on for the other kids around them. And so it's really important to tap into that social emotional piece with your child, because one of the prime examples that we've seen transition from in-school learning to virtual learning is kids are afraid to raise their hands at school, right? That's one of the main things. You got those kids who they raise their hand right away, but a big percentage of them will not. They're nervous. What happened when we went to virtual learning? Kids don't want to comment. Kids are sending everything through the chat. Any Shannon to tell you, we'll be working with 30 kids, and all 30 kids want to send their response through the chat because they don't, they haven't even built that skill in school. And so how is it going to even translate to that virtual space? So for parents who are listening, really building these with your kids at home is definitely going to translate over to school, but set SEL goals with your children. That link that I sent, use as a resource. Look at those different bullet points. Like, you know what? My child could use a little bit more of this. I'm going to set that SEL goal with them, and I'm going to work towards that. And you'll see it carry over to school, and it carry over from school back. So I really appreciate those comments. We're going to keep on moving on. And so with that, we know that there are some SEL gaps, right? And so that's something that, that's just been common since it started. And so one of the things, there was a teacher survey that was conducted, and this was also done by Castle. This was done by the Department of Education, and they surveyed teachers around the country. And so here's a couple of key data points. One of them is this: 8 in 10 teachers, roughly 81%, say a lack of skills reinforcement at home is a big challenge for their school trying to implement SEL. That's coming directly from the teachers, 81%. Another one: a correlation was found between lack of student interest and schools with less of a school-wide emphasis on SEL. So now you're seeing them kind of in both. Now there's a lack of interest in school. Lastly, poor student behavior is a big problem in schools with limited focus on SEL, as we just said. And so if these things are going back and forth and being worked at almost like in a triangle, teacher, parent, child, there'll definitely be some growth in that area. So that's going to take us into this next question. So with data suggesting that kids in schools with little emphasis on SEL and the lack of reinforcement at home are large indicators of student interest and performance, what should we identify as SEL gaps in public education? What are the main gaps other than just resources? And so anybody can chime in on this question. What do we think some of the biggest gaps are?
I think some of the biggest gaps is relevant content. So everybody and their mama talking SEL, but half of the people and their mamas and daddies don't know how to do SEL. So the content needs to be very relevant. The students need to understand or even want to listen. They want to interpret. Another thing with SEL is, and I taught my staff, if you're talking more than 25% of the time, you're talking way too much. The purpose of SEL is to teach, but to draw out what the students know, and then to be able to infuse the learnings in the lessons through the case studies, through the hands-on, through the handouts and things of that nature. The other problem with SEL is parents have got to be involved. So when for instance, right here, Dr. Davis one time called and said, Dwayne, what did you guys talk about in the class? I said, we're doing power words. Why? She said a parent called and said she was beating her sons behind. Tanner, I told you, doctor. And she said the daughter ran and said, Mama, stop. You killing my brother. And she was like, what? You gonna get some too? She said, no, you're using words to tear him down. Today in the workshop, we learned the power of words, that your words affect your attitude. So she just broke it down, and the mom was like, what? And so these lessons have to be so relevant that kids have to become the teachers to take this information home to their parents, who then want to have that knowledge to come back and say, yo, I've been convicted by my own child by whooping that out that I was getting all up in there. And so a lot of the SEL lessons are irrelevant to our people. So it got to be FUBU if you're dealing with our kids. They have to be relevant. They have to be based on what our young people are understanding their reality. Not to say leave them where they are, you got to elevate them, but the lessons have to be relevant to life as they know it in order to lead them where you want them to go.
So just to kind of piggyback off what Dwayne did say, I think one of the key points that he made that I think is extremely important is that when you're doing SEL, and in our case, we do SEL through advising, is that we are the facilitators. We are not doing all the talking. So it's very important that students are collaborating with one another, sharing different things. So that is one of the things that we're working heavy on. I'm a big component of just students doing the talking, because if you listen, you're going to learn a lot. And so I spot on agree with that. And I think going back to the point with getting parents involved, that's a tough animal to try to like get to. But I do believe wholeheartedly that whatever you teach in SEL and advising definitely can transfer to home, which is going to get that parent, just like Dwayne's case, who called and said, hey, what's going on? And so that's, I know what we want to do for our kids in our program. We might not necessarily get the parents to come to a workshop for various reasons. Not saying they don't love their kid, but listen, some of our parents got to work, they tired, so they don't have that ability to be able to come to a meeting. But if they can be able to learn from their child, that's going to spark their interest to maybe say, hey, I need to, learn a little bit about this. And I do agree that some of the SEL lessons are not for our students. They're not for white students. So again, back in my teaching days, every one of my classes were unique. So even my literacy lessons, my math lessons, it wasn't the same for every class, because it's a different group of kids with different needs, different personalities. And so I had to adjust and adapt to what those students' needs. And that even meant my SEL lessons, everything. It's not a one size fits all. That's the work on our part that we have to do. So don't just look at a generic SEL curriculum and say, here we go, here is SEL, because you're not going to get the impact that Dwayne has seen in Matson School District 162, which I am from. So good job. So you're not going to see that impact if you're not adjusting it to the culture of your school and your students.
And I want to piggyback off of Shannon, what you just said, because I think one of the major gaps is also like just focusing so much on that academic piece that we miss out on the child as a whole, the child as an individual, what's their background, their cultural background, things like that, that may actually affect their academic skills. And then I will also say just lack of training, either when it comes to the teachers or the parents. There is a lack of training in multiple areas, and not even talking about just academics. Obviously, there's a lack of training when it comes to the SEL part, but in relation to something that I specifically focus on is lack of understanding or even knowing about things such as like sensory processing and how that affects your child, as well as the whole SEL thing. And then for anybody who's listening who's not aware of what sensory processing is basically just how our brains and our bodies like make sense of all this information that's constantly coming at us on a day-to-day basis. So we know we have our 5 senses. We have our sight, touch, taste, smell. We have our internal senses as well that help us with our balance and coordination. And for kids who don't have like a healthy sensory system, sometimes they do engage in what's called negative behaviors, or they're mislabeled because they're looking like, oh, they're not paying attention, or they can't sit still in their seat for a long period of time, or they're constantly being aggressive with other kids. But it's not that they're doing these things on purpose or they're being intentional about it. They actually may have some underlying sensory components that a lot of parents and teachers are not aware of. And so these kids are being flown under the radar, or they're being mislabeled because they don't know, and we don't have this knowledge in our communities at all.
That's really good. All three of you out. That's some really good feedback, and I'm going to add to that. I think one of the biggest things is we got to love on our teachers a little bit more. And as a teacher, a lot of times it's easy to just kind of, forget that, like, look at what they're dealing with, right? You know what I'm saying? You are dealing with a lot of times, especially our teachers who are working in 90% or more African-American schools that have that free and reduced lunch. You're dealing with teachers who are underpaid and they love hard, right? These teachers love hard. And if anybody's read The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, you know what it means to have an empty love tank, right? And so these teachers are loving so hard and they pouring out every little thing, like, they coming in, and a lot of times you get to, especially around this time of the school year, they looking for stuff to give. And they just looking for that sun to come back out. So as a parent, not only build a relationship with that teacher, but show them a little love. You know what I mean? Send them that gift card at during the holidays. Do something that's going to really spark them up, because that is going to go a long way, not only for your student, but also for the rest of the classroom and for the staff in that school. Because more teachers showing love is more love for everybody. And so that's one of the biggest things as well, is just making sure that we appreciate the people who are in front of our children.
Absolutely.
So hopefully the pandemic has taught parents that now that they're home with their own kids all doggone day long, because everything before was the teacher's fault. Now they see they didn't do such a great job of raising them kids to send them off to school.
That part right there.
Man,
I got you, Shannon. I got you.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, we making pretty good time. We making pretty good time. So we gonna keep on moving along. And so this is for the parents here and how they can be more proactive. So once again, I love data. And so a couple of data points from the Department of Education. According to the Office for Civil Rights, 1.6 million students attend school with a sworn law enforcement officer, but not a school counselor, right? In fact, the national student to counselor ratio is 491 to 1. However, the American School Counselor Association recommends a ratio of 250 to 1. So we're practically, the counselors in our schools are already dealing with more kids than they can handle. Yeah. And so that's the first thing. Then let's look at students of color are often concentrated in schools with fewer resources. Schools with 90% or more students of color spend $733 less per student. And so in Chicago, I want to say there's roughly, most of our schools have roughly, especially like the K-8s, have anywhere from 375 to 450 students. So if we go on the high end and look at about 450 kids at that dollar amount, we're almost at 500,000. So and that's per school year, right? So think about how much over the course of 8 years, 500,000 each year can add to that potential school. But if you look at it at the per student, that $733, that can be implemented to that child at home. Now, everybody don't have an extra $733, but a lot of parents do have that extra money because they can go get the mics for their kid. They can go get all these other things. So really educating our children, our parents rather, what could $733 per school year look like for your student? And so with that, the question that I have is, as we can see, SEL is not a priority in many of our communities based on Department of Education data. This means, like many other things, we must take SEL into our own hands. With the pandemic taking its toll on families in a variety of ways, how can parents be proactive in utilizing SEL strategies at home? And so I want to start with you, Shannon, because you have school-age children that are right in this category. You have a daughter and son. Aria is in fifth grade now, fourth grade.
She's in fourth, yep, and Austin's in second, yep.
Yep. So yeah, what are your thoughts about that? What are some things that you do?
Well, so the one thing that I will say is that you need to know your child's strengths and you need to know your child's weaknesses. So this year, my son was entering a new school. So when I met with his teacher, I was able to just spot on tell her, hey, this is what Austin's strengths are. This is his weaknesses. This is the areas we are pushing him at home. And we would love for you to push him as well as school. And I mean, when I told her that, she was just like, oh my goodness, this is great. You know, parent teacher conference, the same thing. You just need to be able to explain to your teacher what it is you want for your child, almost like the goals you have for your child. And more than likely that teacher will be able to kind of help that child along the way. And then, I taught second grade. So, for me, I would tell my parents, they're not a baby no more now. I don't want you trying to get their backpack together for school. I want him to be able to do that. If he doesn't have the homework, we'll work it out, because they need to be able to learn those skills, because once second grade, you're entering into third, which is that benchmark grade. So I do a lot. Now, my daughter, she is struggling with the executive functioning skills. I told her, if you was at school right now, they switch classes. She is all over the place. So we had to do schedules. I had to do organizational bins for her. And I was freaking out, because I'm like, I'm in education. You should not be struggling this way. But I had to take a step back and just be like, you know what? It's a process, Shannon. She still needs to be able to go through that and, celebrate her successes, but reflect on the areas we need to work on. So just being able, I think one thing is just building that relationship with that teacher is so crucial during this time, during the pandemic. Over communicate. Get on that email, communicate with your teacher, child's teacher, see if there's any virtual office hours you and the child can attend. And more than likely, the teacher's going to be like, yes, I will meet with you, because they don't want to see the students struggling. In most cases, I'm going to be fair. The teachers who I know, they don't want that. So just be an advocate for your child, but also be a partner with your teacher and work together. Whatever the teacher's working on virtually, embed that at home, because it's a team effort, in my opinion.
Yep. Dwayne and Ashley, any thoughts on this one?
I would say, just for the parents, since I work with the younger population, like, don't be afraid to start early. I have worked with kids as young as 2 years old and starting to just implement and teach them the basics, like, what is an emotion? Can you recognize when somebody has a certain feeling? So just that identification piece. So I would say start when they're young. You can start by reading books. You can start by watching movies. They have animated movies that are out about different emotions and things like that. I would also just say, for parents, you also have to be the example, right? So you can't be teaching your kids these social emotional skills, and then, like Dwayne was saying earlier, you're beating them 5 minutes later, so it kind of is like you have to give yourself like a reality check as well, and recognize too that certain things have been passed on from our families and families before us. So some things are just kind of ingrained, and we automatically do things because that's what we were taught. But then we have to take a step back and be like, oh, it's up to me now to like change how I'm going to teach my child this skill. So I would just say, overall, start them young and be the example.
Ashley, you are spot on with the example, because we've been trying to limit my children's screen time. So once they get, they're finished with virtual learning, of course they want to get on the Nintendo Switch. And so I'm like, but they're not being active like they used to. And so we decided to pick days where there's just no technology. Okay, so that means I can't be on Instagram too, because my daughter will call me out. You're on Instagram when there's no technology time. So just being that model is just crucial, because they literally see everything that you do, and modeling is key. So that was spot on, Ashley.
Yeah, I always say children are watching, and from a very young age, they pick up everything. So like they're going to just model whatever is being taught in the home. So
Absolutely.
You want to start in making sure they get what they need at home, so that hopefully it does translate when they go off to school or in their communities as well.
Absolutely.
On that note, the communication model is 55, 38, 7. People listening respond to 55% of your body language, 38% of your tone, and 7% of your words. So if a parent is telling a child, education is important, I want you to do your homework, but they're watching television and playing video games all day long, that body language is showing the child what's really important versus what they're saying. So 55% of your body language, meaning what you do speak so loudly, your children cannot hear what you say. Talk is cheap. And, same thing, little things like be kind to one another, but you cursing your brothers and sisters out as the parent. Guess what? That's what they see. That's what they're going to do. So I 100% agree with what Shannon just said.
Oh, yeah, no, and those all were really good. And I mean, so my son is 4, right? And that whole they do what they see, they do what they hear is so real. I mean, with Wesley, I mean, he had put his clothes on the way he see me do it. He talked the way. The other day, he told me, Daddy, I appreciate you. And I'm like, hold on a second, man. That's how I express myself. What you talking about? You appreciate me? You know what I'm saying? I'm like, man, but yeah, I mean, he will just literally like do what he sees, right? And so it's very important how I come, how I go. Things that I know are my bad habits, right? I know that that's a bad habit. I have to be careful because I don't want my son to pick up on that very thing. So it keeps me sharp, right? So, Dwayne, I saw you ask the question, how early is early? I don't know that there is early. So in the book that I had wrote, The Academic Dilemma, one of my tips to parents is do not delay learning. One of the things my son told me, I was making him something to eat. He's like, Daddy, when the food gonna be ready? I'm like, in a little bit, man. It's almost done, almost done. And so that was my pattern. Whenever I cook, it's almost done, it's almost done, it's almost done. One day he told me, Daddy, you say it's almost done every day. Some parents would have been like, and it's gonna almost be done today too.
Right.
But that click, this is a learning opportunity. Okay, you say, I do say that. You're absolutely right. Went and got the little stopwatch. Dinner will be done in 5 minutes. You're about to learn the concept of time today, son. Hold this stopwatch. It's time to learn. It's time to learn that. And so we have to look for those ends because he gave me an end. He was attentive. Now he asked for the timer for stuff. Daddy, I have to get the timer. And so we can't delay learning. If you see that end, you got to go directly in. So we are at 7:40. We have one more question, and then we're going to open it up for questions. If anybody does have questions at all, you can start dropping them in the chat. Or, I mean, we have an audience of 5, so I can allow you guys to come on and ask the question verbally. But the last question is, and this is looking forward. So there's not any data on this, but I'm sure there has probably been some research on what people think or projections. But what happens, we're in the first year of a new decade. What happens with another decade of ignoring SEL concerns in our schools? Like, what does that look like? Because right now, it just started. It's only been out for about 10 years now. And so I'm expecting it to get stronger. I'm expecting the awareness to grow. But what happens if we kind of ignore SEL?
I mean, again, this is no research, but I think, if there is no SEL, if it begins to decline, you're going to see a lot of college-age adults not being able to, one, manage their emotions, not have self-awareness, not be able to just advocate for themselves. And that's what you're going to see. And so it's important to be able to go through all of the 5 SEL components that you mentioned. And I'm just confident in knowing that our teachers recognize that. And you can't teach a lesson without, enforcing some type of SEL. I mean, in my opinion. So I just hope it gets stronger, but if not, you're definitely going to see some adults and college students who are struggling big time. And I mean, you see it in some of the adults, who didn't have it, who are trying to manage it now. And it would be great, if we can incorporate parents. Again, me and Dwayne did mention the child being able to model that. But this is one thing I know is true. If you offer something for parents, just offer it. No, not making it mandated, just offer it. You would be pretty impressed on how many parents sign up. Q and I did a financial awareness PD. What was it? Yeah, a PD for parents. We probably thought we was gonna get like 20 parents. We was gonna be happy with that. We were blown away. How many parents? It was like there wasn't even enough room. What does that tell me? Parents want to learn about financial literacy. They care about generational wealth, and they have a hunger. And I believe they have those same things for their child. We just need to offer it. And the same high expectations we have for our students, we need to have the same high expectations for our families, for our parents. I know every parent that walked in my room, everybody didn't like me, but I had high expectations for them. Point blank, period. We're gonna work together. Everybody got the same expectations. So, that's what I would have to say.
I would say, just piggybacking on what Shannon was saying, like decreased problem solving skills. So being out in the real world and not knowing how to solve real world problems because you didn't get that, in that school setting or when you were younger. I would also say, especially like in our community, increased mental health issues. Mental health is already a big issue in our community anyway. So without that SEL implementation, I just see it getting worse from here. And then I would also just say decreased communication skills. And that's already on a decline anyway, because everything is so virtual these days and kids are all about video games. And I don't understand kids watching other kids play on YouTube. I still don't understand why or how that works, but that is kind of like the environment that these kids are growing up in. So everything is virtual, virtual, virtual. And then when you get in person, they don't know how to talk to somebody. They don't know how to, or I've been sitting next to someone before and they're texting me. I'm like, I'm sitting right next to you. Like, talk to me. Why are you texting me? So like, I just see it getting worse from here if that's the case.
Yeah, they need to start out with SEL. When they get back in school, it just need to be an SEL boot camp.
First couple weeks. Let's figure out how to treat each other again. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
My thoughts on it is, first, I think, thank goodness we'll have a new administration, Biden and Harris. And I think with that administration, I do believe they'll be there for at least 8 years. I think we will see a significant improvement in funding for SEL. However, if they don't focus on it, what we're going to see is a lot of things, a lack of self-awareness. And when I don't know myself, I don't know you. When I don't love me, I can't love you. So that's going to be a huge human factor. People won't know their strengths and their weaknesses. So therefore, they're going to be, narcissism is going to be even higher. People will overestimate their ability, overestimate their performance. Everyone gets a trophy, everyone gets an award. No, you lost. We need to understand what losing looks like so that you don't hold a whole country up hostage because you lost. And you need to be able to accept losing and the inability to empathize or to have empathy with people. That's a part of SEL, to know, how's my actions making someone feel? Why do I even care to know how you feel? You know, not to say that I agree with you, but I at least need to know other people's feelings to have a range of emotion. Lack of self-control is going to come with little SEL. I think someone said it earlier, Ashley, no to low self-awareness, poor relationship skill, irresponsible individuals. So a poor leadership. Right now, we have a lack of leadership around the world. And without SEL being able to teach that leadership component of SEL, we're going to miss that. And then the last thing, which is interesting, is going to be people are going to have more relationship with inanimate objects. That's happening now, where people are literally dating robots. People have robot girlfriends, robot boyfriends, because to actually, I was watching this documentary about Japan, because the population is going down. They literally have robots to interact with the people. They're talking to them. They can hug them. They can snuggle up with them and all of this stuff. So that is going to be a really interesting world if we continue to go down this direction. So SEL might be the thing to help save humanity. And my grandma would say, and Jesus.
Yes. You know what, Dwayne, I love the one thing that you mentioned is losing. Because it's almost like if a child did not reach their goal, you still learn something within that loss. You still learn something if you didn't quite reach the goal. And that's the reflective piece that we often don't allow our students to do. You must reflect. What went wrong? What didn't you do? What can you do better next time? And I am a huge component of just like really reflecting, because you always learn something within the process. So that's why when you have kids in sports, particularly our young boys, which my husband's trying to, teach our son, okay, you lost, son. Okay, how do you feel? Why? Let's go. That's why we have poor sportsmanship. And then the person who's running our country, he's a huge sore loser. So he is just showing everyone this is what you do. And so I think it's important to just really reflect and trust the process, even with wins and even with losses.
Absolutely.
Yep. So I think, Dwayne, you hit on relationships, and I'm going to hit on it from another angle. Back in the 60s, I believe it was, I can't remember exactly which year, but some data was pulled that showed that African-American children, 24% of them were without fathers in their home. You fast forward 60 years, and that back then, that was considered
75, yeah,
that was considered an epidemic. Now we're at 75% young people do not have men at home. And I think that the biggest trend we're going to see is you hit on the relationship skills, man. If you can't love yourself, I'm not going to have the ability to love nobody else. And we're going to continue to bring children into this world that don't have love around them. And it's going to spiral out of control. I was talking to Tanya Van Court. She's the CEO of Goal Setters, and she is the only Black woman who has a financial tech company that's been recognized by CNN, Forbes, and all of this. But she gave some data about the wealth gap. And she says in 50 years, the trend is saying that 70% of the African-American middle class's children will revert back.
Oh yeah, one generation.
Man, I'm like, man, and so we have to figure out something to shift this. You know what I mean? Like I'll be damned if Wesley go back. My family did too much work. You know what I mean? And so we got to move forward. And so, but we also, I want to see his peers move forward. What benefit is it to my son if he's doing so well and the majority of his peers are not? Who's he going to pull from? And so it's urgent that we help our communities. And so with that, with this last 10 minutes, we want to, you got something else?
I just wanted to say something. You said something so powerful. So the generation before us worked hard. They bust they behind. They always told you stuff, you got to be twice as good. But our generation, we didn't want our kids to have to suffer the way we did. We didn't want them to be as hard on our kids like our parents did. We want them to shelter them. We don't want them to have to go and work that hard. So now the same thing that made us successful with our hustle and our grit, we've stripped that from our kids. Now this new generation of kids, everybody want to win a gold medal when you haven't even competed for anything. Everyone want to be told how great you are because that's all their parents tell them how wonderful they are, and they're mediocre at best. Every parent wants your child in the gifted program and you barely can doggone read, okay? So what we have to do is our generation got to take some of that responsibility because we didn't like being raised so hard and they were so hard on us. So we sheltered our kids from the same thing that made us successful, and we're not giving them those tool sets. And so we got to get back to that discipline and that love and tough love and all of the other stuff that we receive, but we're not giving to our kids. We're just giving them all the stuff.
Absolutely.
And I mean, unfortunately, you see it in millennials. I hope no one's a millennial on here, but they want everything right away. Sorry, Ashley.
Oh, Shannon, no, because I was just about to say the same thing. I was about to say the same thing.
They want everything right away. And I mean, I've talked to some and I'm like, honey, I was not making this much at 22. I had to work my butt off for everything. They want everything quick. They don't want to work hard. They don't want to sacrifice. And again, that's a part of your process. You're not going to come out. Everybody not going to come out making six figures when you graduate from college. I didn't, but I worked my butt off to get to where I am. And some of our millennial friends, they are struggling in that area. So we need to get that better for this generation that we have.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that delayed gratification piece, that starts early, because even some of the kids that I'm working with now, I'm teaching their parents, like, make them wait. Like, they want something, they're crying for it, they want it right away. Hold on, make them wait. Like, teach them the concept of waiting, because they want everything fast, they want it right now. And it's because they have that ability nowadays. You got Amazon, you get your box the next day. You got DoorDash, you get your food in a matter of minutes. You don't have to go grocery shopping anymore. Like, so they don't have to work hard if they don't want to, but it's important that we still teach that to them.
Absolutely.
And you know what, too? We got to also teach morality and integrity and decency. See, when we grew up, you would hear, you got to go to school, you got to stay out of trouble, you got to keep your nose clean, and you have to be respectful. That's not the case. You can be a straight up thought now. You can have a sex tape, you can be a straight hood, whatever, and you can do it like to a level that little kids want to emulate you. You get shows, you get money, you get sponsorships. So that whole paradigm has shifted. You can be the biggest fool on the planet and still make money if money is the key to success.
Oh man, that's real. And that morality and integrity piece, man, that's a whole nother conversation, man, right there. So we'll have to come back for that one. But we appreciate those of you who joined. I appreciate my panelists. We do want to open it up. If there are any direct questions that anyone would like to ask, please put a hand up. Okay, so I have one. I am going to allow you to talk here. And well, you know what? Because that's going to bring you on. So tell you what, how about—
Let them ask directly.
Yeah, but that's gonna bring them on camera. So if you don't want to be on camera, cut your camera off because that's gonna bring you directly in. All right. So we'll promote you to a panelist, and you'll be rejoining the webinar as a panelist as she comes. Ms. Wilson, how are you?
Oh, okay. I'm good, thanks. So I'm Ms. Wilson. I'm both a parent and a teacher, so I have two lenses. First, I want to say thank you all for your insight. This has been very great. Can you hear me? Because I feel like I'm breaking up.
No, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? You can hear me? Oh, okay. Zoom doesn't work that well for me, so. But I had 3 questions. One of them was answered. About families, like how do you get families to buy in? And Shannon said just simply offer. So I feel like we sometimes are afraid to offer things because we just think parents are going to say no. So that answered that question. My second question was, how important is SEL for teachers? So a lot of it is around SEL for kids, but especially during this pandemic now, I feel like teachers also need like SEL support. So how important is it for teachers to also get SEL support?
Are you talking about, Tia, let me just ask a clarifying question. For SEL support, are you referring to like the teacher going through support for themselves or support with teaching it?
Support for themselves.
Absolutely. And you know what, that is key. And you know, now I don't know if Dwayne probably has some, because I know he did a lot of work with parents. But again, when I was in the classroom, some of the lessons, I was like, oh my goodness, I need this. So I would take some of those lessons and apply it to myself, because I do think it's very important, because if you don't have the SEL skills yourself, it's going to be very hard for you to implement that with your students. And so even though the lessons may be very basic and, oh, I know this, it can be very helpful to just go through it with them. I know when I taught at NKO, we had a curriculum that we used for SEL, and they had this breathing exercise that they did that just to kind of calm kids down. And let me tell you, Tia, I did that breathing with them, and that got me calmed down. I'm like, okay, I can do another lesson real quick with you all. That was my rough group. And I did them breathing exercise, right? We was all on the carpet breathing together. And so it worked, you know, so I do think it's important. And I do think that that's something that, you know, schools should think about, but I know it's just a plethora of other things that are just top priority. But I would start with that, Tia, going through the lessons with the kids and you kind of doing the lessons within yourself and then be able to implement it with your students.
I think it's absolutely crucial for the teachers to get SEL as well. We have a series that we do with teachers, managing stress, and it goes from breathing techniques. There's so many different things. Here's the reality. Teachers are nothing but grown kids, and most of them never had SEL growing up ever either. So the reality is, if you don't know, you just don't know. If you've never been taught, you just will never know. So some of the teachers are growing up with the same challenges, even though they have a college degree, they have a license and things of that nature, but they still lack the same capabilities that many other children and many other parents do. So if they haven't been equipped with SEL, then they're not bringing SEL to the job. So if you want SEL taught well, you have to empower those that you want to instruct with the SEL.
Yep.
I would add too is, so with that Castle 5 that we shared, there's a lot of small bullet points. I would go through and rate myself, right? I would go through and I would look at all these and I would rate myself and I would rate my child. So like the very first one, self-awareness, the very first one is integrating personal and social identities. That in itself, that could be spent a week just working on that particular one. And so going through each one of these and being able to check off, like demonstrating honesty and integrity. I do that. Linking feelings, values, and thoughts. Like check them off. Like, how good am I? Give yourself a rating system and then go back and say, you know what? I could work on this one. Maybe I'm looking at some videos. Maybe I'm ordering a book. Maybe I'm doing some self-help that really kind of digs my knowledge deeper into that category. And also setting a goal with your child to do the same thing as it relates to him. So that's kind of how I would address like really learning SEL for yourself and applying it for yourself. Is just going through that list and start to check off. Like, I'm good here and I could use some work in this area, and being honest with yourself.
I agree.
Okay, thank you. That answered my third question too, about how do you go about setting those goals. So you answered that question too. So.
Thanks, Miss Tia.
Tia, what grade do you teach, Tia?
I teach 5th grade.
Oh, that's an interesting grade right there. Okay.
Love that grade. That is a great grade.
It is. Fourth grade is where my heart is. But
Yeah, fourth grade is wonderful too.
Yeah. Okay.
Always said that 4th to 5th grade transition is crazy.
Crazy.
5th, man, they like 2 different people. Like the other years, they kind of was a smooth transition. 4th to 5th, though, man, look, who you think you are? You think it's only been since I saw you last. But oh yeah. So you definitely have your hands full with that. Are there any other questions at all from our audience? And if not, see any hands being raised. I know I tried to address some of those questions while we were in here, but if not, on the behalf of Hybrid Focus, on the behalf of our panelists, Intervision, Play for Purpose, Shannon at the Academy Group, I just want to thank everybody for joining. We'll be back next week talking about spirituality and purpose in our young people, developing spirituality and purpose. So we got another great lineup. So we hope that you come back. And with that being said, you guys have a great rest of your evening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you,
was
guys.
great. This was great. It was nice meeting you, Ashley and Dwayne. Good work that you're
Great
doing.
meeting you, Shannon. Ashton, thanks, Q.
Yeah.
No problem. I
Nice meeting
appreciate you.
you all too. Bye. Thanks, Q.
No problem. All right. Good night.